SAP S/4HANA projects are being canceled at an alarming rate. But why is that, and what can you do to avoid that same fate? That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And many of our clients are implementing S/4HANA and have implemented S/4HANA in the past. We also deal with other types of software vendors and helping them through their digital transformations. But one of the commonalities we're seeing with S/4HANA implementations is that more of them are struggling and failing and/or being completely canceled. In fact, if you look at our client base and all the different technologies that we help clients deploy, it's the S/4HANA implementations that are the most troubled. In fact, we've had more clients cancel their S/4HANA implementations than any other sort of technology deployment. So in other words, you look at Oracle implementations or Microsoft D365 implementations, NetSuite, Workday, Epicor, whatever the product is, S/4HANA leads the pack amongst our client base for troubled and/or canceled S/4HANA implementations. So what I'd like to do today is talk about why S/4HANA projects fail, why they're being canceled, and most importantly, I want to talk about what it is you can do to avoid these same challenges that a lot of organizations are having at the moment. And if you're looking for more best practices on how to make your S/4HANA implementation more successful, I encourage you to read our Guide to Successful S/4HANA Implementations. It's a guide of best practices and tips and lessons learned of having helped so many organizations throughout the world through their S/4HANA transformations. You can read that paper by scanning the QR code in front of you, or you can go to the links in the description field below. So it helps to back up for a second and look at what are the trends in the marketplace as it relates to S/4HANA implementations. And as I mentioned at the top of the video, the failure rate of S/4HANA implementations is higher than other systems, at least as it relates to our client base. But perhaps most importantly is we're seeing an acceleration and an increase in the number of clients that are completely canceling their projects, which in some ways is good news and bad news. It's bad news, obviously, because you're canceling a project after having spent a ton of money on it. But the good news is at least you're cutting your losses and moving on or figuring out another path forward, which is to say that it could be worse. So that's the first trend, is that we're seeing an acceleration of failures and cancellations. But even if we look more big picture, even outside of Third Stage's own client base, and just look globally at what's happening in the marketplace, if you read the news and just Google S/4HANA implementation failure, you'll find a ton of articles about recent failures. You have companies such as Spar Retail Group in South Africa. You have Haribo, the candy company based out of Europe. You have Lidl, the supermarket chain based out of Germany. A lot of different big organizations that are failing in their digital transformation efforts involving S/4HANA. In fact, if you want to learn more about the top 10 SAP failures of all time, I encourage you to watch my video on the topic. You can find that video right here. This video gives you the top 10 failures of all time and talks about what went wrong with those failures. So I won't dive into those reasons here, but you can watch that video for that definition of why the projects are failing. But suffice to say, failure rates for S/4HANA implementations are not at all what they should be. So this all begs the question, why are S/4HANA implementations being canceled? And why would they be canceled? What are the things that are contributing to organizations coming to the conclusion that they need to cancel their project? The first is lack of functional maturity. S/4HANA is simply not as mature as ECC or R3 or any of these older legacy products that SAP supported for decades. And if you think about it, it's understandable why that would be the case, and it's not surprising because S/4HANA has only been around for a few years, whereas R3 and ECC were around for decades. So all of that research and development that went into the legacy products are not overnight being translated into functionality for S/4HANA. So it is somewhat understandable, but it's a reality and a risk that needs to be dealt with. At some point, this will be a moot point, and S/4HANA will have the functional maturity as some of the old legacy products, as well as some of the advancements that they're making with technology. But for the time being, they're still in a state of transition of allowing the product to mature. A second thing contributing to SAP implementation cancellations is the fact that S/4HANA is a complex product, much like legacy SAP products as well. SAP by definition and by design is a product that can do a lot of different things. It's a very robust system, even though it's not as mature as R3 and ECC and other legacy products. it is a product that's very complex. It does a lot of things, and that comes at a price. So that's another reason why organizations are struggling with their implementations. And then third, the forced migrations that SAP is really forcing upon their customer base right now is also contributing to some of these challenges. SAP has set a deadline of 2027 for organizations to convert from their legacy SAP product to S/4HANA. So it's creating this artificial burst of demand for implementations. And what that's doing is, first, it's causing organizations to implement potentially prematurely before they're ready to implement. And secondly, it's creating a skills and a labor shortage within the SAP ecosystem. So the spike in demand for implementation services is putting a strain on the resources that are available. So these are just a few of the major reasons why projects are being canceled. And for more information on this topic, or if you want to go deeper into understanding what the root causes of failure are for S/4HANA implementations, you can check out this video right here that I posted recently that talks about why SAP implementations fail. So the next question is, how do we avoid failure in our S/4HANA implementations? How can we avoid that dreadful day where we decide to cancel the implementation altogether after having spent millions of dollars and however many years on the implementation? First, it's important to be realistic. You want to have a realistic expectation for what it's going to take to go through your project. You want to understand the real resource requirements, how much time it'll take to get through this project, what the budget will actually be. Those realistic expectations oftentimes are the difference between success and failure. Organizations that have unrealistic expectations are much more likely to fail in their implementations, and they're much more likely to cancel their projects altogether because they were never going to complete the implementation in the parameters that they expected up front. A second way to avoid failure and a cancellation of an SAP implementation project is to really understand the complexities and limitations of S/4HANA. So on one hand, you want to understand how robust the system is and what it takes to deploy a robust, sophisticated system like S/4HANA. On the other hand, you want to fully understand what the limitations are. What are those maturity gaps that I talked about earlier? Those things that maybe R3 and ECC did easily and without a lot of effort, but maybe didn't translate into the S/4HANA capabilities. You want to know what those risks are, not because you may necessarily change course on what system you're going to deploy, but because you need to understand those risks. You need to understand those blind spots so that you can decide how you're going to address it. Are you going to take longer to deploy? Are you going to customize the software? Are you going to do a third-party bolt-on to address that gap? So really poking holes in the S/4HANA solution is really important, not to create doubt for your team, but to go in with eyes wide open to understand what it's going to take to deploy that technology. Another important way to avoid an S/4HANA cancellation is to make sure that you have ownership of the project. Make sure that your internal team develops their capabilities around S/4HANA and really takes control of the project, in ensuring that you are managing the project and the project and the vendors are not managing you. So building those internal competencies, both in terms of technical competencies around S/4HANA, as well as the capabilities to manage the overall project, are very important to be successful. And finally, it may be important to choose the lesser of two evils. Canceling a project midstream is a lot less painful and a lot less worse than getting to the point of failure and trying to go live and headed down the path of disaster. So it's not ideal, but you may decide at some point that it is time to cancel, or at the very least, put the project on hold and reset the project, recast the plan, and redefine your strategy if it's not working. So really having the foresight to recognize when things are off track and doing something about it is one of the most important things you can do to help ensure that your project stays on track. So I've talked about how to avoid failure, but let's talk about what some of the best practices are for your implementation. In other words, the things that you can do to ensure that you don't head down the path of failure, cancellation, or a challenged implementation. First is to conduct a fit gap analysis, to really look at the deep capabilities of S/4HANA and understand what it can and can't do. Oftentimes what happens is organizations go in assuming that they know SAP, they know ECC or one of the legacy products, and they know that SAP can do certain things well. But what you knew about SAP in the past with the system you might be using now is not necessarily the same for S/4HANA. So you really want to go deep and get an objective and agnostic view of what the strengths and weaknesses of the product are. And a company like Third Stage, who is not affiliated with SAP, can be a good alternative to help you do that. Secondly, you want to create a realistic plan based on realistic expectations. You want to ensure that you're not only putting together an overall plan to help deploy technology, but that your plan also includes integration and data migration and change management, the overall program management, process improvements, getting your leadership aligned. Those are all different activities that are really important to a project and are typically on the critical path for a project, but they're typically not included in a proposed project plan that might come from SAP or one of its partners. So make sure that you have that focus going into your SAP project. And finally, you want to take ownership of the project. In order to be successful, you want to have control of the project, and you, the client, should be in control of the project, not SAP, not one of SAP's implementation partners or system integrators. So some ways you can do that is, first of all, make sure you find the technical consultants and outside technical resources that specialize in S/4HANA, but are the ones that are the best fit for your organization and ones that you manage to ensure that you're successful. Secondly, part of your implementation team should also include technology agnostic resources, so partners that are not affiliated with SAP or any of its system integrators. So that technology agnostic partner should be the one to be able to represent you and make sure that you have control of the project and that you keep it on track. And then ultimately, your program management, the project governance and controls, all the decision making should flow through you and your internal team, not through SAP, not through its system integrators. And the reason this is also important is because so many SAP projects go in with an outsourced mentality. They have a big system integrator, a big software vendor in SAP, and they assume that those big third-party vendors can manage the entire project for them. But if they do that, it becomes their project, not your project. So it's very important to make sure that you take ownership going into the project. Now, for more implementation best practices to help make your S/4HANA implementation successful, whether you're just starting out or whether you're already midstream in the middle of a project, I encourage you to read our Guide to Successful S/4HANA Implementations. This is our technology agnostic book that we've written that provides a number of best practices to ensure that your project stays on track and that you're ultimately successful. You can read that book for free by scanning the QR code in front of you, or you can go to the links in the description field below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day. In fact, we've had, what?
You can do it.
What in the hell am I trying to say? All right. And finally, in fact, we've had, now I forgot what I was going to say. Lesser of two evils would be the way this video is going. Okay. For opportunities to bring in in fact, we've had more clients cancel their S/4HANA.
Oh my
God.